Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jana Weiss. I'm the Student Life Coordinator at Coleman College. And today with the Academic Success Center, also known as Tutoring, we are having another round of recipes for success. And today it's how to interact with your professors with a special guest, Daniel Delia, who is a librarian and is a former Faculty Senate President. So please welcome Daniel as he talks to you about how to effectively interact with your professors.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm glad to be here. And just to give a little background to that, because Faculty Senate may not mean a whole lot as a student, it's an organization where all of our faculty members, all of your teachers are members of it, and we elect people to represent us. It's similar to our current governance in the US. And so I was elected president for a year, which meant I got to sort of advocate on behalf of every other instructor that worked here. And I got to see how a lot of things worked, which was pretty fun and pretty cool. As a librarian, I also have a different perspective, I think, than most faculty members. And so I think those two roles combined means that I really try to see sort of these interactions from a lot of different perspectives, right? In some ways I am the teacher, in some ways I'm a student. I work with instructors as well as sort of for them. And so I think I have a unique perspective on how we can engage with instructors. And in some ways I served sort of as an advocate for faculty, but I think as a librarian, I served as an advocate for students. And so I'm excited to talk to you today about different ways that we can interact with people and just look at that and try to become more effective. So with that, I will move us on. And so just to give you a general overview of the next 25 minutes or so, I'll give you some tips on general effective communication. And then we'll look at 4 specific ways that we do communicate with our instructors. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll play a little game and just do a knowledge check and see if we're on the same page. So with that, I'll give you my perspective on what I think effective communication looks like. So I think the most important thing to look at when you're trying to communicate with someone is to know your audience. That is who you're talking to. And part of knowing your audience is also knowing how you relate to them. I think about it like this. When I talk to my mom, it's different than when I talk to my wife, but it's also different than the way that I talk to my kids. And it's different than the way that I talk to my instructors or professors when I was in college. And it's different than the way that I talk to students when I'm in front of them, when I'm sort of up there teaching. So I'm understanding that my audience changes, doesn't necessarily change what I communicate, but it does change how I communicate. And so I think it's really important to consider your relationship to them. Following from that, it's really important to try to understand the other person's perspective. You're the student, you're talking to an instructor. You are probably trying to get through the class, to get a good grade, to get a degree, possibly to get a good job, or possibly to transfer to another university. The instructor's job is to help you learn. And so they're going to have a different perspective on things than you are. And vice versa. I think these are always two-way streets. So when you're trying to understand what the instructor is talking about, the instructor should also be trying to understand your perspective as well. And from that, I think the third point is one of the ones that I feel pretty strongly about, which is be respectful. You may not always agree with someone, but you can respect their perspective and you can respect their opinion. You can respect how they interpret things, and they should respect you back. I always think of the Michelle Obama quote of "When they go low, we go high." I think that's true here. And try to be respectful of someone, even if you don't feel like they're being respectful of you. We can kill them with kindness, right? We can, if you think someone is being disrespectful, take a deep breath and just say, okay, how are we communicating? How can we do this differently? Let's try this a different way. Easier said than done, but important. And then lastly, I think part of that respect is to be organized, to come prepared, to have some idea of what you're trying to say, and to try to be efficient, to try to use the time that you have effectively. And so you can do that by being organized and coming prepared, making sure that you've either taken notes or maybe just written down some things that you want to remember when you're trying to talk with someone. But those are some general sort of broad, I think, good communication with everyone techniques. It's important, I think, also to think of when you're talking to your instructor, if you're trying to know your audience and your relationship to them, consider who your instructor is, right? And we have about 800 faculty that work here full-time, and about twice that that work here part-time. That is, they teach a class or two or three. So we have a lot of instructors that work here. So none of this will necessarily apply to someone that you have right now, but these are what I think of as, in general, the people that I know, the people that I work with, the people that I care about that work here and try to teach students. In general, they love what they teach, right? If they're teaching you English, they like writing, they like communicating. If they're teaching you welding, they love that. They did it as a job and they thought it was important to help other people learn how to do it. So keep that in mind. You may not love the subject, but they do. So part of respect is understanding the relationship between their love of what they're teaching, and hopefully you get some of that love as well. We were all students. Every single person who is an instructor up here took classes of some kind at some point in the past. We should remember what being a student is like, right? Some of us maybe don't remember it quite as well as we used to. Some of us remember it very, very fondly. Some of us remember it maybe not so fondly, and we try to do it differently. But you can make that callback. You can say, do you remember what it was like to be a student? If you think that they're forgetting some of the things like that. Another thing to remember is they're teaching, if they're full-time, about 100 students a semester, and sometimes more, sometimes fewer, right? If they're only teaching one class, maybe they're only teaching 15 or 20 students, but they're teaching a lot of different people. You have 3 or 4 or 5, maybe 6 instructors, but your student has a lot, your instructor has a lot more students than you have instructors. So it's not to say that you're not important or that you're not an individual who matters, but give them a reminder of who you are and which class you're in and what time, things like that. The instructor's job is also to assess learning. Your job as a student is to learn, right? That's it. Your job is to learn about the subject at hand. Their job is to sort of prove that you're learning and to try to assess it. So what that means is they have to give grades. Some people grade really harshly, some people grade leniently, but that is a part of the job, is to figure out, is the student that we're trying to teach, all 20 of them, all 50 of them, all 100 of them, are they learning? So grades matter, and they're an unfortunate part of the process. Just remember that they're in charge of the classroom, but they do have to follow guidance from local policies like at HCC, from states like Texas in our case, and from the federal government. So they're in charge, but they've also got to follow the policies that other people put in place for them. And ultimately, I think the thing to remember at the end of the day is they're here to help you. So you've got to ask for help. And that's a big reason of why we're here, is we're talking about how to communicate with an instructor so that you can effectively ask for help, because there are better ways to ask for help and worse ways to ask for help. If any of you out there have kids, especially young kids, asking for help is important, but just yelling help is sometimes not that helpful. So the more you can advocate for yourself, the better off you are. There's a couple different ways. I've identified 4 of them, but a couple different ways that you as a student can communicate with your faculty member. The way to think of these is, some of them are direct, they're in person, face to face. Some of them are indirect, they're through online methods like email or Canvas communications. And some of them are time restricted, like before or after class, or in class. And some of them sort of can take as much or as little time as you need them to. So we'll look at each of these different communication methods and which ones are better for different types of things and which ones are a little bit less good for other types of things. And before I get into that, just some reminders in general before you communicate with someone through email or through face-to-face or in class or outside of class. Have you checked the syllabus? Do you know what the syllabus is? The syllabus is that document that an instructor creates for each of the classes that they teach for each semester. It's posted on the Learning Web, which you can get to from that website, learning.hccs.edu. It tells you the instructor's style of teaching. It tells you the content that they're going to cover in the class. It should have a calendar of events. It should have what we call deliverables, the sort of things that you have to turn in eventually. Sort of everything about the class generally is posted in that syllabus. And I shouldn't say everything. A lot of things about the class are posted in there. If you've never used the Learning Web before, you can search by your instructor's name. Last name is probably better unless it's a really common last name. My last name is Dilla, D-Y-L-L-A. I'm the only one that shows up if you search for that. If you search for Daniel, I also show up, but it's a little bit more that you'd have to choose from. And once you find the instructor's name, then you can choose the specific class that you're in. We're also obligated to keep them. We have to keep them there for previous classes as well. So sometimes you can look at how they taught the class last year, for example. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not, but make sure that you're choosing your current class and the specific one that you're in. Another thing to ask yourself before you talk to somebody is, have you asked a friend from class? Have you sort of checked your memory? If you have a friend in class, that's great. That's really powerful. If you don't, try to make one. You don't have to make them forever, but you can make one for the class at least. And lastly, I'll say this: ask for help as soon as you need it, or if you can read the future before you might need help. That's the best way to get help, is to ask for it. There's a lot of people at HCC that are here to help you. You've got your teacher. Right? That's the sort of the bare minimum, is the person that you see, whether online or in person, for your classes. But you've also got tutors. That's a group that's sort of helping organize this thing. We've got wonderful tutoring centers across the district and online. You've got counselors that can deal with other aspects of your life that might be impacting your instruction. They can help you develop plans or processes to deal with that. You've also got librarians, people whose job it is to help you seek and find information. We're all here to help. And we try to be proactive. We try to reach out to you to help you before you need it. But sometimes we need your help to know if you need it. So you got to ask for it. So I'll stop there. I'm just going to check the chat just to make sure there's nothing that's come up while we're there. Feel free to throw something in chat if you do have a question, and we'll try to answer it. And if not, we'll have time for it at the end if you'd rather say it out loud. I am a strong advocate. I'm sort of an introvert. I don't love public speaking. I don't love talking in front of people. I love chat. I love being able to read stuff. I think it's a good way to communicate. But as we'll come to in a little bit, we've got different styles of communication, different ways of communicating, and each one has benefits and each one has things that aren't quite as beneficial. So no questions in chat. So we'll move on to sort of the first most obvious way to communicate, which is in class, right? If you're in class, you're usually in there for about an hour and a half. It's a little less, probably about 75 minutes, an hour and some change. You can do that, right? If the instructor is lecturing, raise your hand, ask a question. Some things to do before you just raise your hand immediately is, maybe now is not the best time to ask it. Most instructors will wait to ask questions at the end. Sometimes they'll do checks in the middle to see if anyone has a question. It can be, some instructors will prefer to take questions as they come in. Some instructors will prefer to sort of put them off to the side and come back to them later. So for you, it might be helpful to write down the question. Not everything, not in full, just some notes about what you're trying to ask. Just write it down, type it in your phone, so you don't forget. And then ask yourself, is it related to what we're talking about right now? If so, that's a good thing. If not, can you relate it to what you're talking about right now? Is it sort of related? And the second question to ask yourself is, would someone else ask that question too? Is it really personal? Is it something that only applies to you? Or is it something that maybe you could see other people asking as well? And I think if you can answer yes to either of those questions, preferably both, but at least one of them, raise your hand, you've written down your question, and the instructor is going to call on you. That's true in Zoom, that's true in WebEx, that's true in Teams, that's true in any service. There's a little hand raise function. And people try to get to that in order. In class, you physically raise your hand, right? You go like this and you wait. And when you ask the question, try to give some context to it. Try to not just say the question, but try to sort of relate it to what you're talking about. So you might say something like, I'm having trouble with this idea that you're talking about. It seems like this thing, but actually you're saying it's like that other thing. So I don't understand. Can you help me understand that? I think that way of phrasing a question is important because it shows you're paying attention. It shows you're trying to learn. You're just not quite sure sort of how they came together. I think of questions as clarifying questions, things that make it clearer or easier to understand. I think those are the best kinds of questions to ask. I sort of hate giving ideas of bad questions because there really aren't bad questions, but there are better and worse ways to phrase questions. So I think as long as you're trying, when you're asking a question, trying to give it some context, some helpful information around it, you're in a much better spot to make the communication go well between you and the instructor. So that's face-to-face communication in class. There's also going to be questions where they don't quite make sense in class. Maybe it's not something that you could imagine someone else saying, or it's not quite related, but it's something that came up during class that you are really curious about answering. And so those are perfect kinds of before and after class type questions. A couple things to note about this. They're good for those questions that don't really relate to anyone else, but they've got to be short because the instructor may have other classes to teach either after or before, or they may have to prepare for the class before you're doing it. And so it could be that the instructor can't really devote a lot of time to the question, but if it's quick, if it's short, if it's sort of hard to say in writing but easy to say out loud, that seems like a great time to do it. If it needs an immediate answer, that's a great time to do it. You've got the person right there, you're right there too. It's short, we're going to get to it quickly. A couple of downsides to it, if there's other people that are waiting as well, the instructor will also try to sort of queue people up and line them up so that they're in the right order. If it takes you a minute to ask a question and the instructor has 5 minutes and you've got 10 people ahead of you, you're probably not going to have time to do it. So before and after class are fine for those sort of short questions, but keep in mind that not every instructor is going to be available for a long time before and after class. But that is a good time for relationship building, saying hi, checking in how people are doing, and sort of building how you relate to the instructor. But that leads to, I think, a great time to engage with an instructor, to try to interact with them. This is something we call office hours. For those of you who are coming sort of straight from high school, this concept may not be familiar. For people actually who are not coming from high school and just have not taken a lot of college classes or have and didn't take advantage of this, every instructor holds what we call office hours. That's an open time, and it's a time that we're available. And we post it on the syllabus where we're there probably doing some kind of work, but we're there to answer your questions. The work that we're doing is stuff that we can set aside. We can put it off and say, you're here, I'm here, let's talk about it right now. The only reason we're doing that other work is because otherwise we might just be waiting for someone to show up. One of the, I think, good things about the pandemic, there are not many, was that we did a lot more online office hours than we used to. It used to be that office hours were something where you had to drive to whatever campus the instructor was holding office hours at to talk to them. Y'all live in Houston just like I do. It's not fun to drive in Houston, but if you can do it online, it means that you're eliminating travel time and you could sort of get in and get out a lot quicker. So as of now, a lot of us do host office hours online, and we'll post that somewhere. I use my WebEx room. Other people might use Teams or Zoom. The platform, the way that they do it might be different, but the idea is the same, is that they're available for some amount of time. Some instructors will say office hours by appointment. And all that means is you say, hey, you talk to them at some point and say, hey, I have a question. I would love to talk to you about it outside of class. Then you schedule a time that will work for both of you. So most office hours are at least an hour, sometimes a lot longer. Some of the downsides are because they're open, someone else might be before you, someone else might be after you. It's not that you get to sort of have the instructor all to yourself for an entire hour or 2 hours, but but it is a great opportunity for those sort of difficult questions or personal questions that you don't feel comfortable sharing in front of others. And I think one way to sort of show respect is to be organized and to relate your questions to other things you've learned in class. If it's a specific homework question or a specific test question, or a concept or an idea that you're having trouble understanding, the more you can relate it to something else you've learned in the class, I think the better the relationship between you and the instructor is going to be. So come prepared with the question, and expect that it may not be perfectly fixed by that interaction, but it's part of the process to figuring it out. So I'll say this again, office hours are posted on the syllabus, and if they're not, they should be followed by something like by appointment. Talk to the instructor, figure out a time that will work for both of you for office hours, and go interact with them that way. I think that's the best way to do it. And sort of finally, one of the, I think, sort of easiest, but also most, I'll say most dangerous ways of communication is emailing or just through Canvas. So the Canvas method, I think, is generally best. If your instructor uses Canvas, which is our online platform for hosting classes, your instructor will know who you are. They'll know which class you're in because Canvas sort of keeps track of that, which is really helpful. It gives them a lot of extra information about you that you don't have to provide. If you're using regular email, I recommend using HCC, your student HCC email address. It's your W number at student.hccs.edu. It's your official communication method for being a college student here at HCC. Some instructors, like I said before, we have to follow guidance from local, state, and federal policies. Some instructors only respond to emails from a student's email address because we have to follow this policy called FERPA. And it doesn't matter what it stands for, but the idea is that we're not supposed to communicate about class or sort of instruction-related information with people that aren't the student themselves, right? It's to protect you and your educational data and educational information from other people snooping and asking questions about it. Sometimes it's your parents, sometimes it's your girlfriend or your boyfriend, but we're only supposed to communicate stuff about your grade and your progress with you. And so those instructors will use your email address as a way to sort of prove that it's you. So it's important to use that if you're emailing them. Also, just as a organizational and kindness, respectful sort of thing, include your class and meeting time. Say, hey, I meet with you at Tuesday mornings at 9:30. You could be nice, thank them for their time. They took the time to read it. You're taking the time to interact with them and to send them the email. But that goes both ways. Call them by their preferred name. Some of our instructors are going to have doctorates. They might have a PhD, they might have an EDD, they might have a JD or some other sort of title. They worked hard for that, and some people find that to be important. So you might call them Dr. So-and-so or professor or instructor if you don't know sort of what their status is. That's something I'm putting out there. I have colleagues and friends that are particular about it. If you were emailing me, you can call me Daniel. Most people will say that towards the beginning of the class or in their syllabus about sort of how they prefer to be called. And I think that's just a kindness that I would hope they would extend to you as well. We all have different preferences for our names. Like I said, I'm Daniel. Some people may have my same name and go by Dan or Danny. And I think if someone called me Danny, even though I've never referred to myself as Danny, I'm not going to be offended, but I'm also not exactly super happy if they're calling me that. So I think being respectful there is important. And then sometimes with email, you lose emails, you don't follow up, something happens, or it just gets sort of pushed down. That's a downside, I think, to email, is that it can be lost more easily. And so what I like to do is I set myself a reminder to say, if they haven't responded to an email that I sent, I'm going to follow up. I'm going to email them again a few days later or a week later or some amount of time. It doesn't really matter what it is, but at least a day, probably several days, maybe even just the next class period, but be kind about it. Hey, I sent you an email. I'm still having those issues. Maybe we could talk in some other way. It could be that email just isn't a good method for that. And so I think giving an opportunity for an alternative is important there too. I do want to say for all of these methods, right, it's a two-way street, and I hope that the instructor is also giving you the same courtesy, respect, and organization that you're giving to them. And so if they're not, I think you can, kill them with kindness. As Jen is saying in chat, use complete sentences and proper grammar, right? It's not a text message. I think that is generally true. And to me, that goes with respect, is to sort of proofread, if you know that term, or if you don't know that term, it's just to reread what you've written, and to think about what the other person is saying, or what the other person is reading when they read it. Think of acronyms, those sort of short phrases that we use a lot because we know exactly what they mean. BTW, OMW, by the way, on my way, LOL, or sort of the old ones. And some of these mean certain things. Some of them have transcended and don't quite mean what they used to, but don't assume that the other person is you, right? They're not you. They understand differently and they communicate differently. Some people would say don't use emojis or don't use emoticons in emails. I think that's generally true. You want to be professional if you can. But sometimes in professional settings, you might throw in a smiley face if what you're writing is hard to read. There's a lot of different ways to approach professionalism. Some people will say never use all caps. I think that's a good rule. A lot of people read all caps as yelling, and so if you're typing something in all caps, it can sound like that. But as a rule, I could maybe sometimes you want to emphasize something, and so you use all caps just for part of it. But it's hard to say certain hard and fast rules, but I think using complete sentences and making sure you're communicating what you mean to communicate is the most important part. Some of us may be here because communication is what we need to learn about. So that's a hard one, but as long as you're thinking as you're writing, I'm trying to respect the other person, I think you'll end up in a better spot. Yeah, that's another good one. Thanks, Jana. I had hinted at this, but I'll say it more explicitly. Email is a slower communication method. It's not an urgent priority. It's something where you need to indicate, hey, this is an issue, or this is a question I had, but it's not going to be an immediate response. But it will be a response. Usually we think of at least 24 hours. In reality, it's probably closer to 48 hours, two sort of full days to expect a response by. And one of the things that I think a lot of us have learned, especially in the last couple of years, but is always true, is your working hours and your student working hours are not necessarily my working hours or my teaching working hours. So you might be up at 2 a.m. finishing an assignment. I've been there, done it a lot. Chances are your instructor is not up at 2 a.m. Although I know some people who definitely are up at 2 a.m. So if you email at 2 a.m., you will probably not get a response quickly. It will take for when they wake up to go to class and check their email and sort of get to that. So it's definitely not something you would use if it's an urgent issue, but it is something that you use if you need to communicate something that doesn't have to be face-to-face. So I think that goes back to being respectful, is understanding that people live different lives. You live a different life than they do, and vice versa. And so if someone doesn't respond, within an hour of your late night email, they're not disrespecting you, they're just living their own life. And I think the reverse is true as well. I will say, if you're using Canvas or if you're using your student email to do it, make sure that you're checking for those things too. If you send an email, you're going to get a response through email unless you somehow specifically say that you need to talk to them in some other way. So give them the kindness that you expect of them by checking your email. So we're approaching, it's 12:30. So we've taken about 20 minutes or so. I have a little knowledge check if you'd like to do. Let me grab this link and see if I can copy it. But it's just a quick little form with a couple of different questions that you can check yourself. Also posted in the chat here. If any of you want to play. This is 4 quick questions with my interpretation of what the right answer is. I think the wonderful thing about communication is it's different depending on who you are and who your audience is. But I think there are better and less good answers to each of these. So if you would, we'll take a couple minutes. You can give it a shot. There are right answers, but you're not getting graded on it. Don't worry about it too much. I'm just curious. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of seconds to read through the question. So if you're playing along at home, you certainly can, and if you're just listening in, you can think about it in your head. But imagine it's the first day of class, and you read the syllabus, and you don't understand something that's mentioned there. What do you think is the best way or the best place to ask that question? You could do it during office hours, you could through class, you could ask it through email, you could not ask it at all, or you could ask it right after the class is over. So you can think about that for a bit. Or you could imagine that it's midnight. So it's question 2. And you've got an important assignment due in your 8 a.m. class. So you still got time, but it's 8 hours away. And ideally you sleep. So you need to let the instructor know you're not going to finish it. It's not going to happen. Something happened. Your dog had an accident. Your family has an emergency that you have to take care of. And what's the best way to let your instructor know about that? Again, same method. You could email them. You could tell them after the class. You could go to class and tell them then. You could not ask the question or statement at all. Anyone can fill out the form. You can click the link and fill it out. So Rhonda, you said email, and I won't make you talk, but in chat, are you asking that for the first day of class syllabus or for the midnight one? Yeah, we'll see. You can put that one. And so here's question 3. So you've got to turn in an assignment late. You just have to. Something happened. The instructor has a policy. I should have written this differently. The instructor has a policy in their syllabus that says no late assignments accepted. And a grade of 0 is given for every late assignment. And what's the best way to talk? Do you email? Do you talk to them during office hours? Do you not ask the question at all? Let me see if I can. And so here's a 4th question. So your instructor just introduced a new way to solve algebra problems. You've no idea what's going on. You do not understand it at all. So you're in class. They just said, here's a new way to solve this problem. What's the best way to ask that one? You could not ask it. You could ask it right after the class is over. You could send them an email. You could go to office hours. Lots of different options. And then the last question is totally up to you because I really couldn't think of one. But what's a good example of a question to ask your instructor before or after class? I'm just curious. You can fill that one out on your own. So we'll talk about these real quick. So Rhonda, thank you for doing that through chat. We got a couple of responses through the form itself. And don't worry if you got it, wrong. I'm not actually grading this. It asks that I do it. And these are my perspectives on it. So for the first one, I think I hope we were on the same page on that one. It's ask it during class, right? You read the syllabus. That puts you in a good light. The instructor will love you if you said that you read the syllabus before class. That is absolutely an amazing thing to do. It also, everyone else benefits too, right? I think anytime you're asking a question in class, if you benefit and someone else benefits, it's what every instructor wants. So for questions like that, absolutely ask her during class. For the second one, that one's a little tricky, right? You can't turn it in, you got to let them know. I think you'd email. I think you'd say, just to get it off your own mind, you email and you say, hey, this thing happened. I can't turn it in. I'm not going to be there. It may not change the grade, right? It may be that you had the worst thing happen to you in the world, and it may not change the grade. It might not. But for me, that's the type of thing that email lets me tell them and let me think less about that thing and to worry about the other part of my life. I think back to an assignment I had where my instructor said no late assignments, and I had to turn it in late. I chose to not do it. There were reasons, and I gave it to him late, and he said, tough. And I still remember it, I still remember it 20 plus years later, but that sort of goes to question 3. The instructor has a no late assignment policy. Absolutely. So my thought was, you sort of don't even ask the question. I think Rhonda had said, talk about it during office hours. I think that's legitimate too. It's important though, I think, to realize that when instructors have a policy like no late assignments, it's not because they're mean. It's not because they don't understand that stuff happens. It's usually that it's so difficult to determine what is sort of worth a late assignment or not, that they've baked into the class something else. And so what I found is really common is that instructors that have a strict policy about no late assignments, for example, also have generous policies about dropping grades or earning extra credit. They may not, but this is, again, I'm talking for people that I know and a lot of instructors, but not every single one of them, is, if say something happened to your dog, that dog may be the most important thing in your life. And absolutely, that's important that you need to go deal with it. I grew up with dogs and I'm not a huge dog person. If something happened to my dog, it's fine. Probably not a big deal. And so it can be hard for the instructor to figure out, is this a big deal or not? And so they tend to go with policies that are like, I don't accept late things. But here's how I sort of bake into the class, ways around that. So you might get to drop an assignment, you might get to earn extra credit in some way. And that is usually helpful. So, these are always tough because all of us want to help and we want to understand what's going on in your life and we want to make sure that you learn. But it's hard to sometimes make a judgment on what is worth a late assignment or not. So we tend to do stuff like that. And then the last question that I asked that wasn't free answer was just, if you don't understand something in class and it's new, absolutely ask during class. Even if it is just you that doesn't understand it, that's a great opportunity to say, for the instructor to say, why don't you come to office hours later and we can try talking about that? Or why don't you go to a tutoring service and see if they can help you? Or why don't you go to the library and ask a librarian if they can help you find more information about that? So those are good opportunities to, even if you don't fix it in class or answer it in class directly, they direct you to other areas for help. But it's a lot of it about you sort of understanding that you've got to be your own advocate and you've got to ask questions when you don't know the answer, and you've got to ask for help when you need it. So on that point, here's a great opportunity to say, ask questions if you have it, or comments or anything like that. But remember that we do want to help, right? We do want to help. Whoever we is, might be a librarian, might be a tutor, might be an instructor, but we do want to help. So feel free to unmute, raise your hand, type it in chat, any of those things. And we'll wait a couple minutes for that too.
I have something to add, Daniel.
Sure. Absolutely.
One thing that you can also remember, especially over here at Health Sciences, is when you're doing clinicals and stuff, and in some other classes, how you work as a team, how you communicate is all part of the grade. Your attendance is part of the grade. So knowing that in advance and how you speak to each other and work together, is very important. And, it might be that you don't get along with a professor or something that can impact you. So you need to keep those things in mind, and how well you get along with them. They might just round that grade up sometime for you.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we would like to think that we're robots and we're perfect and we never, take that we're completely objective. But the reality is we're humans. Every single one of us. You're a human. I'm a human. I hope. Things like that matter. If you're invested in someone, if you're invested in a student, you want them to succeed. So that's a good point, that we want to build those relationships based on mutual respect and understanding and all of that. So Rhonda, I'm gonna ask to unmute, but thank you for raising your hand. That's good. Good stuff.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say I really appreciate this particular Zoom meeting because I'm so new at all this, and it's very helpful. So thank you very much.
I'm glad to hear from you. And I say this because as a student, it's so easy to forget that people do want to help you, especially if you get even the slightest whiff that they don't. You just assume no one wants to help me, but geez, is that not true? Like, try somebody else. If you didn't sort of love one person, try someone else. We've got a lot of people that work here, but everyone I know that works here wants to help students. So, we have limitations ourselves, right? Like I said, we're humans. There's limits to what we can do to help, but we do want to help. And I hope that you remember that, and that everybody in this room remembers that, and that you tell other people in your classes that just ask for help, really, if you need it. Even if you don't need it, it doesn't hurt. So good luck to you, Rhonda. I don't know where you're taking classes. I don't know how you're taking classes, but I hope they're working for you. And if they're not, I hope you let us know how we can help them work better for you.
I have a comment.
Sure. Go ahead.
Sorry.
No worries.
When I was in high school, I had advocacy problems and stuff like that for talking to my teachers. And my mom had to talk to all my teachers, email them, everything. And then every grade up, I started doing and getting involved more. And then finally now, I'm emailing the teachers, I'm getting better at it and stuff like that. And I even write the teacher maybe a week beforehand, because I don't mind disclosing this, but I'm part of the ability department, so I have to send my accommodation letter. So and I don't mind that.
I think that's great. I think learning to be your own advocate is a skill set that will serve you well forever. It's great. It's actually really great that your parent was able to help you, but you are now able to help yourself. And I think that's absolutely what we're trying to get at here, is that you are advocating on behalf of yourself by asking questions and by talking with people who are going to do that. And one tip I will give, because you didn't say this, but I've heard it from others, is that they have an easier time advocating or helping out someone else or asking a question for someone else. It just comes more naturally to them. They would never ask the question, but their friend had a question, so they'll raise it and say, "Oh, my friend had this question," and that's easy. But saying it themselves is hard. And so sometimes, as a trick for yourself, is to just sort of pretend that you're someone else, and think of it that way, right? To step outside your own self, to almost, sometimes you write it down, sometimes you record yourself, but it's almost like asking yourself for advice. Sometimes I don't know what to do, but someone else ask me what to do and I know absolutely how to do it. And so if I can ask myself that question, then I can sort of answer it or advocate for myself in a different way. But that's great, Eliana. Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Probably not. This is Juanita Martinez. I'm one of the Learning Center managers. I just wanted to remind you that there were a couple of PDF files that were dropped in the chat, and it has to reference our future recipes for success workshops that are coming up. And in addition, our tutoring flyer. So if you can, go ahead and scroll up and take a look at that. And you can download that. I just want to keep this going because I want to give you a chance to open them up and save them to your desktop, to your device, or take a screenshot of it. But for the tutoring flyer, let me see if I can share my screen.
Let me give up my share. That might help.
Now let me try it one more time. Share. There you go. Can you see that? The tutoring flyer? Some of you already may know about tutoring services, but I want to make sure that everyone is aware that we're back on campus this week. So we're very excited. We're excited to meet with students again in person. So with this flyer that I'm presenting to you, it explains to you how you can connect with a tutor virtually using Microsoft Teams or on campus. So a lot of the questions I get is, when is a tutor available? I said, well, it helps if you visit our Find a Tutor website. And I give them the address there. It's in the center of the page. And in that Find a Tutor website, it's like a search engine. It's going to give you the subject, the days and times when it's available, and the contact number, which is also listed on this flyer. And it's at the bottom. It's a 713-718-8184. That's our tutoring call center number. It is your best friend if you want to meet with a tutor. Our call center representatives are very helpful in making sure that they find the right tutor for you, and then they set up the appointment. And they'll also help you download Microsoft Teams if you choose to meet with your tutor virtually. So, our tutoring centers are primarily there to help you to stay on track with your coursework, understand your assignments, and improve your study skills. And also, if you go to our main tutoring webpage, you get more information about tutoring in general. And it also has the contact information for the manager. So if you find a subject that's not on the list, you can reach out to one of the managers and discuss that with them. So I just want to wish everyone the best of luck. And thank you, Daniel. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm sure the information is going to be very helpful for our students.
Thank you all so much for having me, and to every student that's here. Thank you for coming. I hope you took something from it, and ultimately, I hope you learned you can ask, and we're here to help. So, thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Y'all take care.
Thank you.